Hey, what's up everybody? Rob here from Ram Studio Comics. Welcome back. So in today's video, I want to go through some more leg studies with you. And actually, what we're going to do is I want to show you this little diagram that I made. And I've covered this before, but I want you to pay attention to certain relationships of the leg before we go to draw it in a more dynamic, inventive, stylistic way. So the inside of the leg is going to be relatively straight, where the outside of the leg is going to have a curve up top and a curve on the lower section of the leg. That's something to really pay attention to. Another thing is, if you follow this line right through here, look how you can go all the way down to the ankle, and it's basically a big S curve. Hopefully you can see that. Let me see if where's my color palette here? There it is. Okay, if I do this with the red, you'll be able to see it better. So if you draw this line, go right through here, all the way down to the ankle, boom. You want to pay attention to relationships like that. It's going to make drawing the leg from your imagination easier. So the other thing is, notice that the ankle goes up to the inside, okay, which I believe is referred to as the medial side. So just like that, it goes up in the middle, and then the calf, or gastrocnemius, which I can see why they call it the calf muscle, it's a lot easier, goes up this direction. So again, these are all relationships. Also shapes. Look at this little diamond on the back of the leg. That's helpful. You know, you're never going to draw a character that's that segmented, but you are going to show hints of this underlying anatomy as you illustrate the skin and the epidermis, or whatever you want to call it, the outermost layer of the skin and tissue and all that stuff. Another thing is, notice the short kind of abruptness and almost diamond-like shape of the gastrocnemius or calf muscle here, but then look at the elongated version, or side of the leg there. The reason why this is so important is this is evident all over the body. Okay, and you really want to pay attention to that, because it will help to make your artwork read more confidently, that you identify with certain things like that. And again, look at the angle here from the vastus medialis to the vastus lateralis. And then also the rectus femoris, it kind of looks a little bit more like a rounded diamond shape here, but notice that it's just not straight up and down. That you can almost feel or notice a bit of curvature there. It's important to pay attention to that. And really all of these can be identified with as teardrops. So I want you to think about teardrops. I also want you to think about rope drawing, the fact that all of these intertwine and intermingle. So when you see it in a more almost sort of like an anatomy illustration, like I have here, then you can pay attention to that. You can really see that. Also, keep in mind the sartorius goes right up there, connects to the hip, or I think it's the hip of the pelvis or whatever. But basically, just remember this shape. This is another important one. Like I said, you've got this S hook here, but it's also a very good way to contain the muscles that you do with the leg, and to ultimately get this kind of shape right here that you want to pay attention to as well. So, all right, so hopefully this gives you a little bit better starting point. So now let's go over here. Let's draw a couple of these in a more comic book, imaginative, stylized way. But again, we wanted to think about the underlying structure before we go to do that. So let's move forward. Okay, so now with what we've learned, let's go ahead and draw a imaginative comic book style, just a more creative version of what we've got here in front of us. So let's first start with the lengths of the forms. So lengths of the leg, upper leg, a little bit of a back bend, even though from a front view it's not going to be as noticeable, but it's still there. And then attach the foot. Okay, so there's our lengths, and obviously this can be adjusted as need be. So what we're going to do is attach, kind of show where it would attach to the pelvis, and just remember that for a male character, it's going to come out at a slower angle, or less steep angle, and for a female character, you're going to show more of a steep angle. Okay, so there's going to be more of a V evident in the female pelvis as it pertains to anatomy. So let's just attach the form, or the upper part of the leg. Use cylinders just to get started. Obviously, if you're a bit more advanced, you could probably even skip this, but I want to show this in a way that everybody can follow along. Bit of a wedge shape for the foot, little point to the toe, something like that. And there's our initial primary forms to kind of, and remember, you're going to look through this information. This isn't the leg. This is just, it's kind of like when you're working with a ball of clay. You add a little bit of clay here and there to build up your form, then you start to sculpt. So I like to think of this in the same way. Okay, so now remember that S curve that we talked about? Kind of goes right through here. So we can get that in. And as we, we go from here, we can attach like the rectus femoris right there, vastus medialis, vastus lateralis. Remember too, I wanted you to pay attention to the shape that comes right through here. So over to the side, I'm going to break this down even further. I want to show you that you can, after you start getting a little bit more advanced, you can really construct the leg with shapes like this. Okay, so this would be the upper portion of the leg. Just what I'm used to doing from, drawing so many different leg poses. I might skip through and just find these primitive shapes. Remember the diamond of the calf muscle, the elongated extension or extended curve on the outside, more abrupt curve on the inside. So you can see I can pretty much start to form a leg just by jumping into those basic shapes. It's pretty crudely constructed, but I want to show you there's multiple ways to do this. So let's go back here. And so the side of the knee kind of comes in, dips in, we get that diamond shape to the calf. We get that extended curve here. We know that the ankle is higher up on the inside. Tricky part about attaching the foot is obviously when to omit the ankle. So based upon the orientation of the foot, the foot for the most part follows the knee. There is a little bit of rotation that you can achieve independently from the knee, but for the most part you can use that as a guide to just keep those two together, unless of course you're trying to exaggerate. But you got to be careful when you exaggerate certain things, because you'll start to make the character look broken, which in turn will obviously make people think that you don't know your anatomy as well. So just be a little bit leery. Like, you want to know where the limits are. You want to definitely test the limits, but then you want to know when to pull that back. Okay, so just like that, we have a pretty crude but a start of a leg. Now looking at it, there's certain things that I would immediately want to see differently in my own stylized representation. Like, I just feel like the foot is too close to the calf area. So I could do that a couple ways really, but one way is just to pull this down and extend the lines. Another would be to change the proportions. Maybe the calf is just too big. So a lot of times I'll just nudge lines around. I'll sculpt. Again, I want to really hit that home with you that a lot of times drawing is sculpting. They're all kind of a similar process of developing what you see in front of you. So let's say something like this. Get rid of some of these lines that are kind of distracting. I think overall that's a decent enough leg where I could carry it further. So now what I'll do is I'll soft erase this, refine it just a little bit, and then we'll move on to another example. So let's say something like that. I'll get rid of these for now. Don't need those. Okay, so again, I'm going to bring out these forms, and I like to throw these little hook lines in. They're somewhat evident even in a realistic depiction, but I generally over embellish them. So I might bring the tip of this down. I might just hook over a line just like that, just to change it and make it look more stylized. And obviously the orientation of these muscles is going to be different than what you'd realistically see, but that's okay. I want to embellish it a little bit. So again, I might kind of really hook this line just to add a little bit of flavor to it. You also want to think about these shapes stacking. So it's kind of neat to pay attention to that. They look like they kind of, they stack different ways upon each other. So play around with that concept. Really think of like layers of a cake or something like that, and make sure that they feel like they're sitting on top, and not just on top of one another, but on top and around one another. So hopefully you see that with this vastus medialis, that it's sitting on top of the leg, the knee, but it's also going around it. You know, you want to feel, these are compounding curves, so you want them to feel like they're traveling in different multiple kind of orientations and angles and flowing. Again, a good comparison of this stuff is always to think about rope drawing, that it all interconnects and that it flows around, behind, sometimes in front. There's all these different orientations to these muscle groups, so you have to get that in there a little bit. And you're going to do that with overlaps, with line weight, proportion even, but you know, think about stacking the shapes. And obviously we can over segment this if we want. But notice too that I've segmented areas. I've pulled little bits of shadow together, not much because I'm not going to shade these, but little bits here and there. And then I can even omit lines to show a light source. So for instance, if I want to bring out the light source over here, I could have this line get very thin and then kind of dissipate in certain areas. Maybe even omit this line altogether on this side, and it shows more of a light source. That, along with developing a thicker line on the other side. I actually like this line here, but I just want to give you that explanation of what I'm thinking there. So let's do another example that gets us a leg kind of slightly off forward facing. You got to remember the leg can pivot or rotate at the hip. So you're very rarely going to draw a straight leg. More often than not, it's at least going to tilt out a little bit. So there's one. Let's do another example. Okay, so now for this example, I want to draw the leg bending and talk a little bit about that. So how it's going to kind of shift based upon the fact that it's bending, you know, maybe towards the viewer. So another pretty popular one is to draw the leg coming out towards camera. So the character is maybe leaping up in the air and one leg is kind of tucked up. And so it comes out towards the viewer, back, you know, the heel might be resting against the glutes, and then the foot comes down. Okay, so as far as drawing the lengths of this particular version, it's not that impactful, I guess, right from the start. It's kind of hard to interpret. So if you were to do this from the side, it would look a lot more like this. And so it'd be a lot easier to establish the overall lengths. This would be the pelvis, so something like that. But in this case, it's coming towards the viewer, so we're getting some foreshortening and some, some idea of depth going on here that's going to shift the look of the lengths. So again, we could draw in some basic primitive shapes just to get started. So we essentially have like a cylinder kind of tilted this way. So you're seeing the side of that cylinder coming up towards the knee. You've got another one going back behind the knee and attaching to the pelvis. So something like this. And then the foot could be drawn with a rectangular shape, a wedge shape, another little wedge shape for the toes. And just like that, we've got a very primitive buildup of this. Now, one thing I will say that when you go to do these more, I don't want to say advanced, I don't know if this is really advanced, but it's definitely more complex than this straight up and down leg that we did to the left. That's pretty easy to figure out by comparison. So if you find this to be complex, one of the best things for you to do, again, use simplified shapes, try to draw it with as little, the least amount of lines as possible, because that will help you to see through it a bit better. And then also to use the angles to benefit you. So for instance, we might get in here and let's just do a very angular version, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to draw all this with angles. It won't take very long. Even if I'm trying to get a curve, I'll do it with two straight lines. And then I'll explain why this is so important to practice at times. So just like this, angle here, even this, I see this as a curve, but I'm going to establish it with an angle, and everything angles, just like almost like a bad video game or something. So just like that, we've got everything established with angles. Why is this important? Well, angles allow us to, one, chisel out the anatomy, which is important, and also it's a lot easier to find perspective with angles than it is with organic or curved lines. So again, you could even chisel out your anatomy, same concept. You could do it all in angles. And hey, if nothing else, this is really good practice for drawing characters like Iron Man later. But the main thing, like I said, is that you get all this in a very easy to discern way for direction, and then we can draw over this. In fact, we could even use this. Let's go ahead and use this as a stepping stone. So we'll put this over here, duplicate that layer, bring it down, scale it up a little bit, and I will soft erase and redraw this. Actually, it'll just be easier to tone this layer down, add a layer, and Command E if you're a Sketchbook Pro user. That just gives you that quick soft erase without having to worry about it. Okay, so now what I want to do is jump in here and make it look more organic. I don't mind angular lines and shapes in my illustrations. I actually prefer to have some of it, but I want a balance. So now what I'm going to do, I can get in here and start thinking more about anatomy and what I know or what I think I know about muscle groups and all that, and I can start to refine this. So I'm going to keep some of these angular shapes, but I'm going to also change a little bit. Like I want there to be a little bit more representation of these bony landmarks. Bony landmarks generally can have some angles, and muscle groups can as well. Like if you look at bodybuilders and they're really in great conditioning, they definitely have some angular, I don't want to say angular lines. There's some angles to some of those muscles, and you can make something look more rigid and more solid by adding angles. But it is the human body, so we have to have some organic lines and some fluidity there as well. So we got to kind of mix and mingle those concepts. Something like that. And again, I'm going to kind of embellish the anatomy and make it look a bit different than realism. So I'll kind of shift things as I go. And I feel like this needs to slope this way. Could be wrong, but we'll try it out. And then as we get back here, this vastus medialis is going to be kind of tricky because, all right, so basically what I'm seeing is I want to make it look larger and more pronounced, but it has to do two things. Like it can't just sit completely on top of the leg. I mean, maybe it could, I don't know, but it just doesn't feel right. It feels like it needs to kind of cut in and do something like this, and then I might even bring that line up and over the knee a bit more. I don't think that's correct, but what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to make it appear more significant than it really is from this angle. So a lot of times when a character might bend down like this, you're maybe going to get a little bit of segmentation at the top, and then this next line, and then maybe some shadow down here, and then maybe a little bit of segmentation through here. So that's probably a little bit closer to what it might look like for a very muscular individual. But again, I'm trying to push this a bit further and think stylistically about this. So I kind of like the original angle that it provided right here. I'm going to bring that segmentation over to here and back down. I might incorporate a pretty heavy shadow under this area like that to explain that form, because again, I want it to be pronounced. So I guess at this point, I'm thinking more almost like a focal point than I am about actual realistic anatomy. And I just want to really keep explaining that as I give you these lessons, that I don't go for perfect anatomy, realistic anatomy. I definitely study it, and I want it to be housed upon knowledge and being informed, but at the end of the day, I want it to be more imaginative. I want it to be more creative in the way that I express it. So here I'm going to jump in and use some actual shapes, not just lines, because I feel that helps to explain this area better. Like with lines, it just doesn't read as well as I would like it to. Like I want there to be a pretty heavy shadow here. I'm probably going to want there to be a few shifts in the shape of the shadow. maybe a little bit of a divide here, segmentation there, so on and so forth. I just kind of keep adding to it. Like with shadows, I slowly pick at them a lot of times, and then I might even incorporate some rendering if I'm trying to figure out how to sculpt that shadow. But instead of just doing and I mention this a lot on the channel because it's something I battle, but instead of just doing rounded shapes everywhere, you really want to fight that urge. You want to give these shadows a bit more compounding kind of shapes and curves, and they generally will look better. You also want to avoid these little points everywhere. It can get a bit monotonous or repetitive in the work, and then therefore look like you're not exploring the shadows or paying attention to the way shadows really look. So it's hard for me to convey that to you because it's more or less me confirming the way that I see it as I try to develop that area within my own work. Again, it's something I struggle with. So yeah, little bits of shadows here and there. Again, you can kind of keep adding to them and picking at them. Or really even the front of the foot should have some depth. You can add a little shadow there. And also we can get in here and do some line work to really show some drop shadows as well. And I feel like the Vastus Medialis would come up into the knee more like this, but it's kind of a weird shape for me. Like I'm wanting the point to be back further. And it could be something else. It could be that the leg itself just needs to come back more. And then you're going to get some like wrinkles here, especially if there's clothing. You're going to really bring that out. I feel like that line just is, I'm fighting to find the right shape or break in the segmentation that I want to see there. But I will be honest, like when it comes to legs, I draw them a couple times, every time. Certain things I draw over and over. If you watch some of my time-lapse videos, you probably see it, but or I would hope you see it if you're really paying attention. But it's I redraw hands multiple times, feet multiple times, leg positions multiple times. There's only a few things that I get right almost instantaneously, and it generally relates to profiles or something I've just drawn over and over and over again, like a plain face. You know, if it's a boring plain face, yeah, I could probably draw that right the first time. I've drawn that plenty of times. But hopefully this gives you gives you a leg up into drawing legs a bit better. There's more that goes into it, obviously. There's lots of repetition and lots of different shapes you want to try around. Obviously, if you bring this leg up higher, it's going to shift. If you bring it lower, there's just so many leg variations. One last thing, and then I'll let you go, and you can practice lots of leg poses on your own now. But one thing I would really recommend, let me zoom up because this won't take much space, is really try to do a bunch of these where you express them in as few lines as possible. So always relate this back to what painters do. There's an example or exercise that painters will do where they paint with the least amount of strokes as possible. So there's a leg, okay, and that's a pose. And then there's another leg, and you want to say, well, I wonder what it would look like if I brought this leg really high up. This, and maybe go a bit extreme, like maybe the foot is somehow pointing straight down, which looks broken, but it's a comic, so I'm going to try it. But you try it in this gestural, quick representational stage, and you can kind of see it. You start to get a little bit better at knowing if this is going to work. But practice doing these. These are really a gold mine for practice activities. Just try a bunch of different leg poses and move them around all over the place, like that kick I was talking about. Throwing a kick towards camera. You want to do it like this and work back. That is a really bad foot, but hey, this is where you do all your bad sketching. Those quick little representational ideas and then move on to the next one and the next one. And you know, you can also look at that and go, wow, I really need to work on this foreshortened shot. I just can't even picture it in these basic rudimentary shapes. So therein lies where you need to practice next, right? That's it. You know, go for that one and do a bunch of studies. Practice throwing kicks in your studio and see if you can get a picture of it. I don't know. That might be dangerous. But anyways, thanks very much for tuning in and watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. There's going to be more of this content in this format on my Skillshare and you know, probably or definitely a Udemy course after that. So I'm going to take all this content and sandwich it together and make more classes and courses. But I wanted to start here, share it with you, get some of your feedback. What are some of the things that you'd like to see more of? What do you face when doing this? What's your strengths? What's your weaknesses? And hopefully I can help you with all that. So as always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.